The next topic on the agenda is IAG's presentation to the board on talent pipeline issues. This very important and timely topic will be moderated by our IAG member, Steve Lipner, who serves on the board as an independent director on the board of PEMCO Funds. Prior to joining PEMCO, Steve was CFO and COO of State Street Global Advisory. Steve will introduce the panel and moderate the discussion. With that, Steve, please take it away.
Thank you, Saba, and welcome to the Accounting Talent Pipeline agenda item. Let me first please introduce the panel. So with us, we have Rich Houston. Rich is the department head of the Culverhouse School of Accountancy and Hilton Dean Chair of Accounting at the University of Alabama. He holds a BA from Washington and Lee University and an MBA and PhD from Indiana University at Bloomington. We also have Becky Sproul, who is the Talent and Cultural Leader for Audit at KPMG. She is focused on developing next-generation auditors by enhancing the data and analytics, technology, project management, and communication skills of the KPMG audit professionals. We additionally have Lindsay Stevenson, who is BPM's Chief Transformation Officer. Lindsay drives innovation, data intelligence, change management, and strategic initiatives at the firm. She's spent the last 20 plus years serving as a change agent in the accounting profession. She holds an active CPA license in South Dakota and the CGMA designation from the AICPA. And lastly, we have Andrew Sutherland, who is an associate professor of accounting at the MIT Sloan School of Management. His research focuses on financial institutions and covers three broad categories. Number one, how entrepreneurs and privately held firms obtain credit. Number two, information sharing and technology adoption. And three, auditing and financial misconduct. Andrew holds a PhD from the University of Chicago, an MBA from Carnegie Mellon, and a Bachelor of Commerce from York University. So I will quickly frame the issue here before I hand it off to the esteemed panel. We'll have a couple of presentations initially from Andrew and from Lindsay, and then we'll go into some panel questions. So I think all are very, very well aware of the topic here at hand. The accounting profession is currently facing a significant talent pipeline challenge. Fewer students are choosing accounting degrees. Fewer are pursuing the CPA license. So it's leading to a material decline in new graduates entering the field, as well as retention challenges amongst existing accounting staff. According to the AICPA, over the last decade, accounting graduates have decreased by approximately 17%. 17%. That's also coupled with an aging workforce that is increasing retirements. So the profession is getting squeezed from both the front end as well as the back end. So with that context, I'm excited to turn to our panelists for their insights on, importantly, what changes are needed to mitigate this, to address these issues, and how to think about attracting, educating, and retaining that next generation of accountants. So I am going to now hand it over to Andrew Sutherland, who's got a deck here at hand.
All right. Thank you, Stephen, for the introduction. Can everyone hear me and everyone can see the slides?
Very good.
Perfect. Okay, well, thanks for organizing this panel on obviously such a really important topic to our profession, and thank you for inviting me to share my perspective on it. You can jump to the next slide, please. So I think a natural starting point for any pipeline discussion is the beginning of the pipeline. So in other words, who is studying accounting? And so I'm sharing a plot here from a recent paper that I have with Henry Friedman at UCLA and my colleague here at MIT, Felix Vetter. The paper's up on SSRN and on my website. So essentially, we're using census data and looking at the number of graduates from college that are an accounting major. And if you look at the last 10 years, so there's a kind of like the last 10 or 11 dots, this is a period when GDP, so in other words, the size of our economy grew by about 24%. And a natural reaction might be, well, maybe the number of accounting majors grew and the number of accounting workers grew by the same percent. But in fact, that's obviously not the case. So Steve mentioned the 17% decline. So in other words, during a period when the economy grew by about a quarter, the number of accounting majors graduating from college is shrinking by almost 20%. So next slide, please. And this isn't just sort of something that's happening to all majors. Indeed, enrollments at college are sort of shrinking or flatlining, at least in some departments. But if you think about finance as a competing major, right? So a lot of us who chose accounting, finance was sort of our second choice. In the years where accounting majors are shrinking, the finance majors are growing. So this is kind of an issue that we seem to be losing market share in the education market to finance. Next slide, please. And so then the $1 million question is why? What is going on? And so there's sort of one line of thinking or one explanation that says, well, we've got fewer accounting workers, we've got fewer people studying accounting, there must be a shortage, right? And I imagine that many of you have seen headlines like this. They've been all over the Wall Street Journal and other publications. Next slide, please. And so indeed, when you think of a shortage, you start thinking about, okay, what supply barriers exist that might prevent people from getting into accounting? And indeed, we have those supply barriers, right? So at least with public accounting, this is a licensed profession. That means that if an employer needs, more accountants today, we can't kind of produce them overnight. It takes time. And one particular aspect of licensing and accounting that attracts a lot of controversy is the 150-hour rule. Many of you know, so this was passed by the states over the past few decades. It essentially requires an extra year in college. And college is really expensive. There's the tuition costs. There's also the foregone income. And some of the academic evidence that I'll talk about in a minute basically says that there doesn't seem to be a huge benefit to this extra year in terms of the quality of the services that CPAs provide who have the extra year, the caliber of people that we attract to accounting. And so, I can sort of understand why people might say, well, the 150-hour rule could be a big driver of this shortage. So let's sort of think about this. So if you could jump to the next slide. So what I've got here on the left are a couple plots from some academic studies. And so without getting into kind of the nitty-gritty statistics, what these are doing are basically plotting the number of CPAs, the number of newly minted CPAs each year by state around the 150-hour rule. So that's you probably can't see my mouse, but sort of the top left plot there, the vertical line is essentially the year that a state adopted the 150-hour rule. So let's take Maryland, for example. So Maryland adopted in 1999. What the plot says is that the CPA entry goes down pretty sharply the year after. So you see the big decrease happening in 2000. And so why is this relevant? Well, if you take a look at what I've got on the right-hand side, this is the year that all of the states adopted the 150-hour rule. And so thinking back to that plot that I showed you at the beginning, where the real drop in enrollment and it kind of coincides with the drop in the number of CPAs, that drop is happening, after 2015. So it kind of sort of fails the smell test that the 150-hour rule is driving everything here, because most of the states, as you can see on the right, they adopted the 150-hour rule, back, well before 2005, for example. And so my punchline was showing you this is that, yeah, the 150-hour rule indeed reduces entry. It reduces the number of people studying accounting, but the timing doesn't really line up for understanding this recent enrollment drop. It seems to be there's something else going on. So next slide, please. And so what else could that be? So I'll share a quote here that I quite like from Martin Schmaltz, who I imagine that you all know. So he's chief economist at the PCAOB. So when thinking about this problem, so he says, the outcome of fewer accountants is an equilibrium phenomenon. Are we sure that demand is held constant? And what he's kind of hinting at is, basic econ 101. So we all probably studied this, that, you have a supply curve and you also have a demand curve. And where those two curves meet is the quantity. And so what that means is that when we observe quantity in a market going down, so in other words, fewer people employed in accounting, it could be a supply issue, but it could also be demand, or it could be some combination of supply and demand. And so one of the things that we're trying to do in this paper that I mentioned earlier with Henry Friedman and Felix Vetter is disentangle, is it really a supply story? Is it a demand story? Is it maybe a bit of both? And one of the ways that economists tend to look at these problems is to look at what happens with price. And just to kind of give you an example that I think you could all relate to, think of what we went through with the COVID pandemic, right? There were huge supply chain disruptions. And if you're looking to buy, let's say a refrigerator, the price of the refrigerators went way up, okay? So what usually happens is when there's a supply shortage, prices go up, okay? Now, the next few slides, and you can jump to the next one, we're going to kind of dig into what's happening with the price of labor in accounting. And so this is some output from the CAQ Edge Research Survey from, I think it was 2023, asking people who considered an accounting major but chose something else, why didn't you choose accounting? And the number one reason here is lack of interest and passion. So that's the very top line. But immediately after that is basically people felt they could get a higher starting salary with a different major. And in fact, if you kind of look through some of the other responses here, they're also hinting at pay in such a way that you could probably combine some of these responses, and that lower pay for an accounting major versus a finance major would have been the leading response. Next slide, please. And so what we did is we kind of updated the plot that I showed you earlier with the green line. And so what I'm doing with the green line, so for example, look at 2009 or 2010, where we've got the green line here. What we're doing is we're comparing the median pay for a finance major versus the median pay for an accounting major. And so around 2009, 2010, the typical accounting major was making $5,000 less than the typical finance major. And then as you see that line going down, what that means is that gap is actually growing. So an accounting major is earning less and less than a finance major over time. And you can sort of see that lines up with the enrollment stats. So as the pay difference between a finance major and an accounting major grows, more students are choosing a finance major and fewer are choosing an accounting major. Okay, so next slide, please. And this isn't kind of a unique comparison to just finance. So this is also from that same CAQ report that came out in 2023. So this lists a number of other majors that accounting majors often are choosing among. So maybe they choose finance, maybe they choose something in statistics, engineering. So a couple of things to point out here. The start year, 2017, accounting had by far the lowest starting salary. And then from 2017 to 2022, the pay rise was actually the least of all of these majors. And it was below inflation. So in other words, the real accounting pay, so real terms meaning inflation adjusted, was actually shrinking from 2017 to 2022. Whereas for other majors, the nominal pay was up 25%, so a bit over CPI. And so when thinking about this, kind of taking a step back, I like to go into this anecdote with, imagine you're shopping for a car and you go to the Mercedes dealership and there's some price for a Mercedes. Let's say it's $80,000 to get a Mercedes today. But you say to the Mercedes dealer, I'm willing to only pay the 2015 price for the Mercedes. I'm only willing to pay like $65,000. If I don't get the Mercedes, if the dealer says, get out of here, I don't even want to talk to you, is it right to say that there's a shortage, or is it more about my own willingness to pay? And I think the analogy to accounting here is that it seems like a lot of accounting employers, for whatever reason, and I'm sure we'll kind of get into this with the group discussion, for whatever reason, accounting employers aren't willing to keep up with the competitive pay level for a business graduate. And that's sort of what at least part of what seems to be going on, and not this kind of classical shortage story where there's some kind of supply side issue. Next slide, please. So one of the points that we're trying to make in this paper is that
could you go back to the prior?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did someone have a question or?
I want to unmute me. Yes. Yeah. So we don't go. So I can just comment on the current chart.
Yeah.
The prior chart, please. I know you keep on mute me, but so I actually would have thought this would be more extreme. And so I see you 16, 20, 25. I see all that stuff, but then I look and I say, counting over the 5 years you show went up 8,000 and finance went up 10. So that's not, the numbers aren't as dramatic as I would have thought. And so if I look at the top and bottom, computer was 72 versus 52, that's difference of 20. 22 is 86 versus 60, that's 26. Okay, so it's 6 more. It's not, I'm not disagreeing with your thesis, but I don't know that this chart supports your thesis that much. That's all.
So I guess one thing to point out is it's not just the change, right? It's also the level was a lot lower to begin with, right? So accounting started.
Then that's a good point to make, but I think your point of increase is not as good a point to make. That's my only point.
Okay. So if we jump to the next slide. So I guess the punchline in all of this is that, it's important to think about demand. One of the biggest changes affecting the labor market, as we all know in the last decade or so, is technology. Technology is automating away a lot of work. So there's a quote here that I quite like from my colleague at MIT, Daron Acemoglu, who actually just recently won the Nobel Prize. And in fact, the first example that he gives when talking about automation is accounting. So he says white collar workers in accounting and other managerial occupation are seeing the tasks that they used to perform being replaced by software and AI. And so it's easy, for at least for me, to think of other examples of this. So, ERP software, TurboTax, QuickBooks, offshoring, generative AI, there's all sort of potential here to automate away accounting tasks. And, this isn't all doom and gloom in the sense that technology also creates a lot of new tasks, right? And in fact, in our study, we find that for students that have a technology minor, so they're sort of complementing their accounting training with some technology training, their wages are going up a fair bit during this period. But the issue is going to be that, are there going to be enough new accounting jobs that technology creates versus the ones that it destroys? My sense is that there's a lot more jobs that are going to be automated away than new ones to be created. But this is sort of a study for us to do kind of 5 or 10 years from now when we have more data. And so kind of the second part of our punchline here is that students see this, right? So if you go to any business school website, they're going to have a career services section where they list the average salaries. They're going to see that the average salaries for accounting majors are kind of stagnating over this period when finance majors are growing. And so as sort of technology is automating away more tasks, as this kind of advancing, enrollment is sort of declining. One more slide, please. And so just wrapping up, I think it's really useful in this discussion not to only think about supply issues when it comes to understanding what's going on with the pipeline, but also to think about demand. So it goes back to Martin's quote about thinking about this as an equilibrium outcome. What is happening with both supply and demand? I think dropping the 150-hour rule, and we know that some states are in the process of doing this, I think this can help increase butts in the seats. But is this going to kind of get us back to where we were 10 years ago? I don't think so, because 150 doesn't really address the demand issue that I've been talking about. The other things that I want to point out here are that, I understand it's natural for people, researchers do this, the PCAOB, thinks very, intensely about what's happening with the Big Four, what's happening with CPAs and public accounting. Now, the thing is, 80% of accounting majors don't even work in public accounting. So this is from the census data. So if we're trying to understand the pipeline issue, it's useful to think not only about what's happening in public accounting, but what's also happening outside of that, because that's where a lot of the accounting majors end up. And also to think about this as a relative game, right? So the typical student who's choosing an accounting major, it's not like they're choosing, okay, I'm going to study accounting or I'm going to do nothing. It's like they're choosing an accounting major versus a finance major or versus a data science major or marketing. And so if we're going to try and think about what's going to happen to the labor market, what's going to happen to enrollment, the things that are happening in those other markets matter. So if for example, that a lot of finance and technology majors suffer from automation, then we very well could see accounting enrollment bounce back. And I think the last year it's bounced back a bit, as GPT is automating away a lot of finance jobs too. The other part of this message about demand is that there could be exogenous things that happen that spike the demand for accounting graduates and increase enrollment. So if we had a sweeping new securities regulation, if we had ESG regulation, students would see that, and that would lead to more demand in the marketplace. Wages would be higher, and more students would study accounting. But the punchline of all of this is to think about demand and not just supply in these discussions. So thank you so much, and I think at this point I'll hand it over to Lindsay.
Andrew, maybe just a quick question before we get to Lindsay.
Sure. Yeah.
This is very good.
Yeah.
So your thesis on declining pay for entry-level students, new grads relative to other professions, would it also hold true for, say, junior employees, 3 to 5 years experience? I'm trying to get to this from a retention angle of more established employees relative to other professions.
So I think it'll depend on exactly the firm and what tasks the person is doing. But yeah, like if they're doing very routine type work that software could replace, that AI could replace, then yeah, it would apply to them too. We dig into this a little bit in the new version of the paper because the census will tell us how many years out of school someone is. And we do see these wage declines, not just at the very beginning, but also sort of this, more junior level as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Why don't we turn it over now to Lindsay, who also has a series of slides for us.
Well, I promise I'll be quick. The intention behind this deck is really
Fine.
just to level set and just provide some data, very aligned. Andrew, a few things in these decks are going to be very similar from a data perspective. So I'll go quickly through those and you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So just to share with you, in addition to my paid role at BPM, I'm also on the AICPA Association board, and I was a member of the National Pipeline Advisory Group, which was formed last year to actually get into why we are seeing less accounting students, why we are seeing some leak points. And so that group got together and really started with a data-driven approach. So what we tried to do was pull together as much research as we can. And Andrew, actually yours is included in some of our conversations that we had. So I'm grateful to be on the same call with you. But we've really tried to take that and figure out, where do we have leak points? So it's more than just, the pipeline is more than just college, graduating from college. It's 1 to 5 year people, it's 5 to 10 year people. Like, where are we losing people and what are the reasons for losing people from the profession? So I just wanted to level set before we had the panel discussion with just some data that I thought you'd be interested in. So Andrew covered some of this, the student perceptions, exact same report, CAQ. We didn't include in here the bar between what they think is a major factor versus a partial factor. This is the total response rate, but lack of interest, the higher starting salaries, costs of education seem too high. I'm not good enough at math. Right, those were some of the common factors as Andrew shared. And so that's what the students are telling us. From a data perspective, another interesting point is that 1 in 8 business-related degree holders major in accounting. So it's not so much attracting someone in the university to a business-related major, it's getting them sticking to the accounting major. So what's happening there? Why aren't they choosing accounting over any other business major? And then just the transition to CPA. So as the IAG and PCAOB, there's definitely focus on the CPA, right? We need a CPA in order to attest to work. That's the whole point, right, of our license. And so from an investor perspective, that CPA is really, really important. And we're only converting about 49% of those 1 out of 8. And so just wanted to give you some of that data background as we start having this discussion to kind of understand what's in the marketplace and what we're seeing to help level set the discussion. And you can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So NPEG, when they met, this was a group of educators, individuals, practitioners in the profession, people that are working in government. The AICPA was involved. We had a group of 21 people who sat in a room. Well, we sat in a room more than we thought we were going to when we signed up to do this for about a year. We met regularly. And based on all of that research, we really identified 6 themes, 6 ways that we think the profession has an opportunity to shore up the pipeline. So to Andrew's point about supply and demand, right? I would argue it's both. There's a component of both here. And if we're going to do our part on the demand and supply side, that these were the 6 themes. So it's not just one thing that needs to be fixed. But the academic experience more engaging, like people want to choose accounting because they have really great curriculum. They're enjoying what they're learning in school. Right now we start with, and AAA has been involved in this process, but right now we start with Accounting 101, and they learn debits and credits. They don't learn the language of business, right? They learn how to put it in a T account. So they look at it and say, this looks so boring, I wouldn't want to do this job. And they don't find out until their 2nd or 3rd year of college and their accounting major of, oh my gosh, I am changing how people choose to invest, the health of an organization, what decisions should be made, right? They don't understand that that's the role of the accounting and business. And so being able to pull that forward and making it a more engaging experience. The time and cost of education, Andrew, you touched on it, right? Is the 150 hours the one and only barrier, that extra year of college? It's hard to tell. The data doesn't support that. It doesn't not support that. It's unclear what that factor is because there's too many components that go into that. However, they did say the time and cost of education is a barrier for them to continue in their accounting studies. So what can we do about that? What actions can we take? The third was increasing support for CPA exam candidates. That goes back to the 49% of accounting majors sit for the CPA exam. The other 51% don't. A lot of the commentary that we receive back on that from surveys and other data points is they just don't feel like they have the time, energy, space to sit for the exam. They go into the accounting profession and they're so busy at work, they can't get the exam done. Expanded access for underrepresented groups. So that's making sure from a socioeconomic perspective that our profession is accessible to all. The employee experience, this is the 1 to 5 year people. So Andrew, I'd love to see your data on the census data once they get past, you know, that first, second year and what that looks like. But what do they feel like in their first 5 years? Are they doing data entry for 5 years? Like, are we going to keep them in the profession if they're doing data entry for the first 5 years? And these kids are in school. They've been using AI for the last 4 years. They know the AI could do this for them. So how long are they going to stick around and do it themselves? And then the last is the compelling story. So Andrew, you shared some headlines, right? When the media is talking about how many hours an accountant works, how low the pay is, and we're not saying anything different within the profession, we're not doing ourselves a whole lot of favors in attracting students into the pipeline. So those were the 6 things that really stood out from the data and research. And so next slide, if you would advance it. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's happening and what we're doing as a result of those things. So one thing is licensure, which I'll talk about in a second, but these other ways, Center for Audit Quality is doing something around Accounting Plus, right? So it's not just about the CPA. It's a way to connect with younger individuals who are still deciding what they want to do with their lives and tell them why accounting is cool and fun and engaging and challenging, right? Like, we want them to see what the profession really looks like. NPEG also put out a grassroots call to action. It's called the Pipeline Pledge. You can actually scan this barcode if you also want to participate in the Pipeline Pledge. But this is our individual commitment as practitioners in the CPA and the accounting profession, that we are committed to telling a better story, that we're going to do one thing that relates to these NPEG recommendations in the next 12 months to have an impact on connecting people to the accounting profession. You've probably heard of This Way to CPA, which is kind of the counterpoint to Accounting Plus. So it's not just accounting, it's specific to the CPA. How does a student actually become a CPA? How could we get them on that pathway? What does the pathway even look like? And then just peer-to-peer. So if any of you have teenage or maybe early 20s children like I do, I will tell you that the only way to communicate with them is through some kind of social media platform. Text messaging isn't even like a thing anymore for them. So there's been quite a big push from the AICPA and our partners' perspective to really get into social media and have them talking to their peers. So it's not me. I'm not on TikTok. I'm old at this point to them. But having, someone who just graduated from college and is having a really great experience and loves their firm or loves their organization, getting on TikTok and talking about the cool work they did today is really, really impactful. So those are just some of the ways that we're shifting. And then next slide, I just wanted to share with you, there is some positive signs. So fall of 2024, there was actually a 12% increase in undergraduate accounting enrollments from 2023. So there was an uptick there. Undergraduate accounting enrollment for the fall of 2024 is 267,000-ish students. That's the highest it's been since 2020. So it's beginning of the pandemic, right? We're starting to see a bounce back from that. And then the combined undergraduate and graduate accounting enrollment rose 10.5% year over year. So we are seeing an uptick. Now, what it's related to is difficult, right? I would love to say it's because we're doing TikTok messaging and we're telling a better story and we're doing some of these things. I don't know, but we are seeing an increase. So I just wanted to share that those things were shifting. And then next slide, if you would. I just wanted to share that this is a collaborative process. So I didn't want to come here and have this panel discussion and make you think that the AICPA is somehow magically doing all these things. It's not happening. NPEG, the whole point of NPEG was that it wasn't CPA driven. It was CPA or AICPA driven. It was AICPA supported. And so all of these organizations have been actively involved in taking action on the research that came out of NPEG and the recommendations that came from that group. So it's been really, really cool to see over the last 8 to 10 months, all of these organizations actively engaging each other, meeting in round tables, talking about the action they're going to take. To the extent I think AAA is on here, that's our academic friends. They're looking at curriculum first year curriculum for accounting. I mean, it's kind of like an all hands on deck response, which is pretty cool to see. So I just wanted to share that it's not, you know, us out here in the Wild West doing our own thing. And then the last slide I have is just to share with you some things that have come out as a result of that. Additional research, really trying to figure out how we do this the right way. So you have something from CAQ, you have the MPEG, and then the public sector. We did partner with NATAX or NASAC, which is our public sector friends, on really figuring out how we can continue to build the pipeline specifically in government accounting. So I'm done. I just wanted to level set and share some of that data. And I'm really excited just to have a good discussion with the panel and answer your questions.
Lindsay, thank you for that. It's great to see some of the early results and some of the action steps that are being put in place. Unless anybody has any questions for Lindsay or Andrew, I'm going to jump into some of the panel questions. And I will prompt Becky and Rich first to give them some airtime here. So question one, and some of this may be slightly repetitive, so apologies for that, but what is the current state of play in terms of interest in accounting and audit professions from both your perspectives? An audit practice perspective in the case of Becky, academia in the case of Rich. How has the pipeline changed in recent years? So Becky, why don't you jump in first from a KPMG talent and culture perspective?
Thanks, Steve. And I guess I'll acknowledge that I represent the 20% that are in public accounting. But what I have noticed and what we are seeing and agreeing with some of the things that Andrew and Lindsay mentioned is that we did see a decline, and our low point was probably around 2022. And we say that based on the number of applicants, right, for our open positions. And Lindsay, I agree with you. I don't know why, whether it's initiatives by the universities, by the faculty, the broader profession, but we are seeing a reversal in that trend, right? I think whether it's some AICPA articles, whether it's the Journal of Accountancy, and we'll wait for the AICPA trends report later on this year, but we're hearing that fall 2024 enrollments are up near pre-pandemic levels at some institutions. What we're seeing specifically in the world of public accounting is that applicant volume is up, and it's very strong. And you think about sort of what the public accounting firms are, right? We hire a year, 2 years in advance, depending on our programming. So this is like 2026 positions, both for intern and full-time. And some of the other aspects that we're hearing from the interviewers around the 2026 pipeline is that the quality of the students is increasing as well, right? We'll assess that during the actual internships or their actual start dates. But I do think the addition of technology and data and analytics and some of the accounting curriculum is beginning to come through as we interview these individuals. We talked about the supply problem, and I think the larger firms, we're filling most, if not all, of our positions, right, for both audit and tax, which we draw from the same pool of accounting degrees. I do think medium, smaller firms, industry may struggle, right, with this trend and the low number of accounting graduates. So, you know, whether it's high school, whether it's community colleges, right, and those are things that we can talk about later on throughout our conversation. But we also have declining birth rates, right? So enrollment in universities is something we're looking at as well. And while we talk about volume and volume of accounting graduates is important, I think of equal importance today is the quality of the accounting graduates. That impacts all of us, right? It impacts not only the public accounting, but the organizations and the private corporations that hire them. And I say that because the role and the profile of our accounting hires is changing. It's evolving, and it continues to evolve. And what I mean by that is you've got your educational requirements. We can argue whether it's 120 hours or 150, right? But there is a degree. There's certification. So CPA, CISA, and I guess for that 80%, right, you've got chief internal or certified internal auditor, you've got CMA, you've got a number of other things. We've always talked about the importance of the technical skills, right? So the technical accounting, the financial reporting standards, right? Whether it's, US GAAP, IFRS, whether it's AICPA standards or PCAOB standards, ability to analyze financial statements, understanding of rules, regulations, tax comes to mind specifically, right? Then proficiency in software, right? The software that our clients may be using, the one that your own organization may be using. Some of these are going to be large ERP systems. Some of them are not going to be as sophisticated. Then there's Excel, Power BI, Alteryx, right? There's an expectation that they know all that. Analytical skills, problem solving, communication skills, storytelling. And that is important because they're expected to display some of these skills earlier on in their career. I have been in public accounting for over 30 years, right? And I started doing that data entry that Lindsay mentioned, right? But that's not what's happening today. So we're asking more of these new hires, sort of higher cognitive work, I would say. So that's what I mean by the evolving profile. We talked about pay. And I will say, I think the chart ended in 2022, Andrew, but I will say that at least at KPMG and our main competitors, we have seen starting salaries increase from the period of 2020 to 2025 by 35%. And in addition to the increased pay, right, we're focused on improved wellness and work-life initiatives, which I really think have been impactful when we talk about attracting students. But I will also say that compensation alone is not the primary factor. It's in the top three, I would say, right? And everybody wants to make sure that they are paid well for their work. But as we talk to our recruits, as we are on campus, as we survey our own interns, right, they're also looking for flexibility and work-life balance. Right. So think about those remote working options, think about flexible hours and a hybrid work model. They're looking for inclusivity. They're expecting a workplace that is inclusive, that they prioritize equality and where everybody feels welcome and respected. They're looking for innovation, right? We talked about how a lot of these professionals are digital natives. They grew up with technology and they expect that their workplace and their employer provides them with those technologies as well. They prefer the modern tools, right? They don't want to tick and tie, right? They want to automate as much as they can so that they can then focus on more of these strategic activities, and they want purpose. They want purpose-driven work, right? They need to understand how the work they're doing ultimately results in an unqualified audit opinion that an investor or a stakeholder is relying on. So they're really attracted to organizations that have that social responsibility initiative and some of those ethical practices in that regard. So I'll stop there. I'll give Rich a chance, but at least that's what we're seeing from the current state of play. Oh, you're on mute, Rich.
Steve, you're on mute.
I'll start. Somebody unmuted me. Thank you. I'll start with
You
some
too.
context about University of Alabama. Maybe some things you probably don't know. We are, of course, a large state university. We are incoming freshman class is usually about 2/3 out of state. And so our majors end up being about 60% out of state, 40% Alabama residents. And the out of state students tend to be high achievers because there's a lot of GPA and test score based scholarships. And so we're seeing really great students. And Becky sees them in the next step. And a lot of what Becky sees is what we see. And her applicants are basically our juniors. Recruiting starts very, very early. Interviews for internships start first semester junior year when they're taking their first upper division accounting classes like intermediate one. And I almost don't know where to start. An observation about there's just so many things that go into this. And I think Lindsay's slide with the 6 things that need to be addressed or could be factors, it is, of course, dead on. And there is no one answer. As you would guess, I'm a strong proponent of the 150 hours, with one caveat. The caveat is what I have started calling recently the original sin, is that you can get 150 hours any way you want, as long as you have enough accounting and business hours. And that often will stop the argument dead in its tracks. It's like you can take whatever to get to 150, and that's true. We have, probably sounds like I'm advertising Alabama. We have a very strong, two very strong graduate programs, Masters of Tax, Masters of Accounting. Our numbers next year are going to be a total of about 150 students in masters, and 3-4 years ago we were at about 100. And even with the talk of 120 hours, and everything I have, all my evidence is anecdotal evidence. I talk to a lot of students, occasionally people from other schools. But in talking to students, despite 120 hours, there's still very strong interest in completing the master's program. And the way we sell our master's program is content and work readiness, and a byproduct is they're ready for the CPA exam. Our enrollments, I would agree with Becky, I think it was 2021 or 2022. Up until then, they were very strong. And then all of a sudden they dropped a lot, 30% or so in 1 year. We're back up to where we were before that. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Andrew mentioned finance. Yeah, finance. You talk to any school and finance has been taking accounting majors. Finance is lucky enough to have the myth of everybody makes $120,000 right out of the gate. And what I've often said is that there should be two statistics on the average salary page. One is mean and the other is standard deviation, with the standard deviation in accounting being very small compared to finance. Becky also is correct that starting salaries have come up quite a bit. Just in the last couple of years, students that completed internships, say 2023, spring, summer 2023, have gotten 2 or 3 pay raises since they accepted their initial offer. And there was a question earlier from somebody about, and I hope I'm doing the question justice. Part of it seemed to be that the differences between salaries seemed on some level not to be big enough to make a difference. I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact we're dealing with 19-year-old kids and they expect them to think like us. And when I think about what I thought like as a 19-year-old kid, it certainly isn't how I think now. You would be surprised how many sweat over a difference of $1,000 or $2,000 between the firm they really want and the firm that's paying a little bit more. And we try to put it in perspective for them by saying, cut the difference in half, divide it by 50. Do you really, for 10 or 20 bucks a week, want to choose to work somewhere you don't want to go? But again, you would be very surprised how much small differences in money make. And it's also, it's impossible not to talk about COVID when you talk about anything. What really, a few things hurt during COVID. One thing that really hurt during COVID was students doing their internships in their apartments, in fraternity houses, sorority houses, and they got the old, why are you working so hard thing? And they were lonely. And I still am getting used to the fact that when I say manager, I'm not talking about someone who's 50 years old. I'm talking about someone who's 27. And I couldn't figure out how to incorporate people that were on Zoom when I had a live class. And I think a lot of the seniors and managers, understandably, had trouble incorporating interns into the audit teams. And I think that really hurt in the short term. Students also, accounting is a hard major. And I think I would guess any difficult major has been seeing similar things as accounting has. The word accounting has a stigma. Intro accounting has a stigma. And it's difficult. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but we joke around here that we're kind of as much in sales as who we are in education, trying to, and we put an amazing person in our majority of our intro classes who really can address a lot of the things that one of the other speakers said about the language of business and importance of accounting, all the job opportunities. We have a lot of master students that interact with the younger students. We encourage, especially in fraternities and sororities, mentoring from the upper division or master students to the sophomores to try to encourage them to major in accounting. And I don't know if I said this before, but layoffs in finance have been very good for accounting. Unfortunately, recessions are always very good for accounting. We were finding a lot of finance majors were minoring in accounting. And when we discovered that, we were able to tell them 9 more hours and you're an accounting major above the minor. And if we can get them to our career fair where firms like KPMG come and recruit, it's very likely they're going to switch to accounting. And so our numbers are very strong right now. And I'm really pretty optimistic about it. I don't know how much, nobody knows how much 120 hours will change things. Anybody who says they know is just really making it up. One thing I strongly believe is that I'll temper it a little, it could result in fewer CPAs. In part because well, I don't know how many accounting hours states will require. So perhaps in part because of a bit less accounting education. I think also the ability to study for the exam when you're still in school, I would imagine increases pass rates. And I also think that a lot of people go into public accounting and unfortunately they've created their time horizon before they even get there. And they say, I'm going to go to public accounting for a year or two and then they don't even know what. And if a student or new staff member doesn't start the exam pretty quickly, when they go on to the next job, they may just not finish. So in some ways, I think it's counterproductive.
Thank you, Rich. I think, Ken, you had a question, if you still do.
Yeah, I mean, it's not more of a question. I just want to make a comment if I could say. I was writing down some things. It's said earlier in today's session that I remember being in the Treasury subcommittee on the auditing profession back about now 15 years ago. And we talked about some of the same things, honestly, then. It's interesting how things change in life and sometimes they don't change in life. And I don't think of all the 6 things, but as I was listening just now, you said there's a stigma. I wrote that word down. And I remember, again, I always preface that I'm a finance person. I'm not a CPA. But I always say that we ought to do more to recognize this profession. I've said that over and over again. In my opinion, it's not dissimilar. There's some other professions that I think are noble professions. I include medicine in that. I think, pay is clearly an issue. I don't think it's a be all and end all, but I do think work-life balance is a major, major issue. And I've certainly talked to the Big Four when I work with them as to how they can improve their work-life balance. And I think, if I were a student and I was thinking about the requirements to become a CPA and join, it is pretty onerous. And so I would recommend, again, I'm just coming at this from a long-term CFO and a board member and audit committee member. I would really think through the requirements that are really needed to become a CPA, and see if there was a way to make those a little bit more lenient, if I could use that word, and focus on those things. So those are some some of the things that I think would be really important to help increase the stature of this profession, which I think is an honorable profession, and get more to go into it. I do think, last point I'll make, I do think automation and AI will help the quality of the work. I don't necessarily think it'll reduce the number of people in the profession, but I think it will increase the quality of work. Just like, if I can think back when you used to have to count inventory one by one, there's now different ways of doing auditing, so that's no longer as tedious a task as it used to be. So I think AI and automation will clearly help basically the profession, if you will, and the work that the professionals do vis-a-vis quote unquote tedious tasks. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Ken. I want to ensure that Andrew or Lindsay, do you have anything else to add additionally to this first question? I mean, clearly you touched upon a lot of this before we proceed further.
I think this is all really interesting stuff. Great points. I actually had a question. So Becky had mentioned that the sort of the profile of the typical student is changing over time. Do you guys track this? Like, do you see that, for example, you're getting students with is it higher GPAs or lower GPAs over time? Like, are we attracting, in your view, better people to accounting than we did 10 years ago? Or is it, yeah, go ahead.
I think it goes beyond the GPA, Andrew, right? I think, we spend time looking at transcripts, right? We focus primarily on behavioral type interviews, like give me an example of having a difficult conversation. We're looking for problem solving and sort of how they think on their feet and how they apply the skills that they learned in their undergraduate degree. Right, we're not giving them a cash flow to do, right? Or we're not having them extract data or anything like that. So that's what I'm saying. When I say we're seeing the quality is different, is we're seeing that they can have these conversations at these higher levels, right? And they have these experiences throughout their academic career that they then can translate to the workforce.
If I can add something to that, I meet so many amazing people. I'm talking about the students. And it's not just, and I think the number of students at what I would call the high end, yeah, there's higher numbers at the high end. We really have moved a bit towards a bimodal distribution from a normal distribution. But I'll go back to the students on the high end. It's not just grades, it's also who they are as people and the extent to which they care about helping other people, doing volunteer activities to help other people, the extent to which they work, just the extent to which they, like, I was in their position over 40 years ago, and there weren't as many opportunities to do those sorts of things, and there wasn't as much, I'll say, pressure to have a resume that's, packed from top to bottom. Some of them do it because they want to, some of them do it to build a resume, but many of them, I don't know how they do it, how they accomplish everything they do.
Okay, so let's transition to, I think, is probably the most important question for this panel here. I think back in my CFO tenure, a former boss of mine used to say quite often, so what's the so what, Steve? I think we know what the so what is. We know what the issue is. Importantly now, what's next? What are we doing next? Lindsay, your presentation did touch upon some of this, but how are companies adapting? How are people adapting, addressing these trends? What is it going to look like 5 to 10 years from now? So maybe some specificity as to what efforts have been made to increase interest among students, juniors with 1 to 5 years type experience. How are we attracting? How are we retaining? Maybe talk about some of those strategies as to the what's next and what this profession will look like in 5 to 10 years. Anybody who wants to jump in?
I'll take a crack at it. at our school, we've got a professional development series, 3 1-hour classes, freshman, sophomore, junior. And we have sections specifically for accounting taught by accounting staff or faculty. And so that goes not so much to attraction because they're already declared as accounting majors, but to retention because we're able to some extent prepare them academically for the major, but also get them to the career fair as freshmen and sophomores to see. We have 2 accounting only career fairs. Most schools our size do that. And we're able to get them there very early so they see what all the opportunities there are for them. We just created accounting ambassadors, which are juniors that we're going to send to the intro class. And we're going to time it after the second exam. So kids that know that they do well in accounting should be open to listening to them and the opportunities they have. All these students will have had internships or will have had accepted an internship offer by the time they go. And we've been trying to, like I said, promote mentorship. This probably has always been true, but I see it, I think, more now than I ever have, that students are afraid to look weak and ask for help. I think we all are to some extent. We almost just try to put it in their face, the assistants in the class. We contacted this semester the people that teach intermediate 2. They have someone working for them who contacts people that struggled in intermediate 1 and maybe failed intermediate 2 and ask them, do you want to be held accountable for the semester? And if they do, they're way more likely to succeed and really discover what they're capable of, stick with the major. And then they tell their friends what a great major it is. And one observation I'd like to make is I've been on, many department heads can say the same thing. I've been on many visits to other schools for accreditation, and every single school, the accounting faculty is amazing and they do a great job with the students love them. And I think we're all doing much the same thing to try to promote accounting.
Thank you, Rich.
Let me give it a go. If I think about, what's changing and sort of the future, look, it's going to be hard to predict, right? Like the rate and pace of change that we've seen over the last couple of years far exceeds, the previous 2 decades of my career, right? I had a very, what I would describe as a linear career progression, right? You go intern, associate, senior associate manager, and so forth, and really followed that apprenticeship model. I'm assuming we've all had the conversation around the impact that AI and technology is having on the profession, as well as offshoring, both, within organizations and their finance and accounting group, as well as within the audit profession. So if I think about the future and what this all means is that, I'm going to borrow this term that one of my partners use, is that the career progression and the profession of the future is going to be more of a jungle gym as opposed to a ladder. And by that, I mean, because of the offshoring, because of the technology, because of this evolution of our workforce, right? We need to invest more in short-term assignments, right? Where they maybe go to a center of excellence and are learning a very specific skill and doing that well. More rotations, right? We're a multidisciplinary firm. So spending some time with our tax group, spending some time in our advisory and consulting group. The importance of some of that on-the-job training will still be there, but the way we teach them and onboard them is different, right? We can't bring them on for 2 weeks and give them 80 hours of content that they're not going to remember, first of all, but they're not going to use for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, right? So the just-in-time learning, the contextual guidance, vignettes and snippets, right? Lindsay talked about social media. Well, their attention span is that of social media, right? So you got to give them bite-sized content. You got to make it relevant. You've got to make sure that it's there when they need it so that they can go and do that research. And we need to do a better job at branding that and advertising that, right? Because the work that they do day to day and their career progression is going to look completely different, right, than the professionals that they're speaking to at my level and even the ones that started 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay. And by the way, I'm unable to see the others on the video. If anybody from the IAG want to jump in with a question, please do.
Steve, it's Amy. I just want to jump in with a quick one, and I don't even know if it's a relevant question, but given the expertise on the panel, thought I'd just quickly ask. It strikes me with the advent or the increased use of technology in accounting, public accounting, potentially auditing. Maybe there's a lot of data science that goes into the curriculum of an accounting degree these days that could pull in even a different skill set, maybe someone that's more math oriented. I don't know. Are you seeing a lot of overlap and maybe data scientists taking that extra year to sit for the CPA? I'm just wondering about the overlap there. We're seeing in investing, a lot of data people becoming investors as well. I mean, obviously on the quant side, but I'm just curious about your thoughts about how technology might transform the curriculum and the type of candidate that's ultimately entering the auditing profession.
I'll just answer it from a candidate perspective. The CPA evolution exam, right? So the exams changed at the beginning of the year, and that exam now is a component. We have core, so there's audit, tax, regulation, right? So the core accounting, and then they can choose a specialization, and one of those is in computers and technology. And so really like making the profession attractive to someone who's like, hey, I'm kind of a data nerd. And also, I like this finance stuff. There is a pathway that actually speaks to them of, we know your role is going to include a ton of data analytics, a ton of working with AI and Gen AI and some of those things. So from a pathway perspective, I think the profession is actually well positioned to welcome that in. I do think it shifts, and Becky touched on it, of what our staff is doing on day one versus what they were doing on day one 5 years ago. So, giving them the sandbox, telling them that there's like, here's your guardrails, but we want you to play, and we're going to review that with you and like learn new ways to do things. Our staff, what makes them magical right now is that they're coming in and they're like, there's a way easier way to do this. And then they take 10 minutes to do something that we used to take 5 hours to do. And everybody looks at them and is really annoyed. And they're like, gosh, that's so much smarter than we are. And so I think that is where we are going to see the profession from a tech perspective. Amy is like, yes, I think we are going to have people who have the vision of, wow, we could change the profession if you give us 10 minutes, a Gen AI sandbox, and access to the audit methodologies. And then we'll see a big shift.
It's just curious, though, as Andrew was talking earlier about the compensation levels, you would think that the technology usage would increase the margins in the overall audit, and thus they would be able to pay humans potentially more at the outset, given the augmented use of technology. I know the PCAOB and board member Ho have been looking into AI a lot and doing some work there. It's just maybe there's a step change that's going to happen at some point, and we're in the transitional phase and need to be a little bit patient. It's just such an interesting time in so many career fields, and auditing and accounting is not different. So anyway, thank you.
Andrew, thoughts on the profession going forward here?
Wow. Okay. So, maybe I'll begin by just something I'd add to the last question on the educational side. What's interesting to me is a lot of programs are adding like data analytics minors, data science. So that's sort of a development that we're doing on our end. I think that better meets supply and demand. And I can think of like a lot of my like my PhD classmates, for example, started out teaching, say, like intermediate 2, but are now teaching a class it's largely like a data analytics class. So education, I think, is sort of transforming to meet the market demand. Like there's just less need to have someone who has the entire IRS, like the entire tax code memorized, because we've got TurboTax, we've got AI that knows the tax code. So I think on the educational side, I think we're also trying to pivot to meet what the market demand is. Remind me, Steve, what's the big picture question that you threw at me before yeah, go ahead.
No, just, thinking 5 to 10 years from now, how will the industry reset to adjust for these current trends in place now, which it sounds like it might be turning, but I think it's still early. What are some of those mitigating actions to be put in place?
So, say academics, we're terrible at making forecasts. We're a lot better at sort of telling you what might have happened in the past. I think a lot of the themes that have come up on the panel are quite relevant to think about. So offshoring is a great example. As communications technology and data security has improved, like the option to outsource has gotten a lot more appealing. So that's definitely something I would keep an eye on. I think, and again, I'm coming at this from the educational perspective. What we sort of want to do is produce students who employees want to hire. So we don't want to be producing students that just sort of have all the accounting rules and the tax rules memorized, but whose labor, in a way that relates to the last question, is complementary to the technology. So giving audit firms and investment firms someone who knows how to use technology that helps them better, quantify risk, better identify fraud, study large data sets. I think that's sort of one other direction to think about.
Well, I think KPMG deserves a lot of credit for pushing the issue with data analytics through the Masters of Data Analytics programs. And I like the way Andrew put it, that somebody was teaching intermediate 2 is now teaching data analytics. What that really represents is all schools need to work closely with the firms, whichever employers, and know, what do you need our students to be able to do? What programs are you using? What do you need us to do? And in turn, what Andrew's point represents is you need faculty that's willing to say, okay, I'll do it. And I can only speak for our school. The people that teach our undergrad systems class, they change the class every year based on what they hear from practitioners. The guy that teaches our data analytics class, same thing. And he's always changing the software he's using, the skills he's building. And what's going to happen 5 or 10 years from now, I think that's a question like, what impact is 120 hours going to have? The answer is, I don't know. Maybe somebody does. I certainly don't know. Hope I'm still working. That's all I know.
We've got a couple of questions here. George first, then we'll go to Satyam. George?
Yes, Steve, thank you very much. Great panel, very interesting discussion. I'm just curious, and I'll talk about technology, which I conceptually fully support. But I'm reflecting, I was on a college campus about a year ago, and a PhD student came up and said, I want to get your reaction to something. I said, of course, said, sure. And his, I'll say, hypothesis, for lack of a better description, was that he believes on the talent issue that a lot of students might either hear all the investments that are being made in AI and technology directly or through the press, and they may be thinking, well, gosh, maybe this is an area that doesn't have a long-term future because of technology. So I'm just curious, maybe from the academic community more broad, is there a balance here that, yes, it has all the potential, again, which I think it does, to take away some of the things that we all did many years ago and make things more strategic or more engaging, more thought-provoking work? But is there a flip side where someone, going back to the comment, an 18 or 19 or 18-year-old might be thinking, gosh, is this going to be, a 30-year career possibly, or is at some point does technology kind of consume a lot of the work? So I'm just curious if there's a balance that needs to occur with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say certainly we had a retired partner from one of the big 4 firms, somebody who's very involved at the highest levels of the firm. And he told my class in the fall, when someone asked about AI and will that do away with their job, he said accounting will always be a human endeavor. And if I could have him say that one-on-one to every single person who might major in accounting, that'd be amazing. The difficulty is trying to get to students in large numbers and tell them, deliver the messages we want to deliver. That yes, technology can be a tool you use to have a more interesting job, to have a more interesting career. It's just we struggle quite a bit with how do we reach students in large numbers. And somebody earlier said texting is dead. Yeah, it is. Email's dead. Yeah, so there is a lot of fear on the part of students, or concern on the part of students that, yeah, technology will do away with accounting, which of course isn't true.
So George, what I would say to that is that if you're not adopting or using the technology, then you're probably going to be out of a job, right? However, technology is going to enable the human, it's going to augment the human. So we don't see where it replaces it. It will change what the human does, right? And the level and type of work and activities that they do. So that would be my message to students, right? Avoiding the technology is not the answer, because if not, you're going to be left behind, right? So it's sort of adopting the technology, embracing the technology, and then using it to make you more effective, to make better decisions, to make better risk assessments, to look at more data, right? That's what the technology allows. And I think to Rich's point, we need to do a better job of telling our story.
Great question, George. Satyam and then Gary.
I'm curious for the group, but especially those of you in academia, how you've thought about the implications of the pipeline issues with accountants for the US government. And I can imagine that manifesting in a couple of ways. One is the US government is probably even outside of the SEC and PCAOB, a large employer of accountants and auditors and people with that training. How do you think about the pipeline of people who want to go into those professions in the US government with a CPA in hand? And then second, for the PCAOB in particular, should we think about implications in terms of regulatory processes, in terms of modernization, in terms of increased pressure it places on oversight bodies like us or others like the SEC to not have that first line of defense as robustly as we used to have maybe in the profession? So a broad question on implications for government in particular.
Oh, please. I think, Rich, you're better for this one because our students tend not to go into government, so I don't have much insight into this one.
Yeah, we don't. I do have an insight from one of my a recent visit to another school. Something pretty amazing they're doing. Our market is mostly our students mostly go into public accounting, and I'll just make one comment about that, then address your question. Way earlier on, the question came up of I can't quite remember the context, but it was if the numbers, I know this isn't what somebody said, but what if the numbers go too high? Will there be enough demand from next, however many tiers you want to say there are, next tier firms? And I think certainly yes. One thing we struggle with is we have about 50 firms come to our Meet the Firms event, and we're more concerned that firms 30 through 50 are getting what they want, so they come back, because we know the other firms are going to get the students that they're after. In terms of working for government, I don't have any direct insights into that, but the school where I was at another large state school, and they have this incredible arrangement with the state government where some of their students work on projects for the state government. And I could be getting this wrong, but you'll get the point. If they choose to go to work for the state government for a period of time, the firm where they have a full-time offer is going to hold their offer for them. And it really promotes, it's the most incredible thing I've heard about promoting interest in government accounting.
I just wanted to jump in here too, just from a resources perspective, Satyam. the AICPA and I don't want to mess this up, the National Association of State Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers in 2024 did put together a working group and tried to identify opportunities for hiring and retaining CPA talent, both in the government and in firms that do governmental audit work. And so they actually have a resource report that talks about what those opportunities look like and what they're doing to address those. So just to answer, I can't answer it myself, but I just wanted to tell you that resource existed if you wanted to go and look at that.
Thank you. Gary, I think you're our last final question.
Okay. My firm has a pretty active internship program where we regularly have 20 interns, which is about the same number of professionals, by the way. So pretty active, and we catch those kids when they are, starting their sophomore year, so very early on, and they're trying to figure out whether they go accounting or finance. Most of them are double major candidates, and so I'm usually in the position of trying to explain why finance would be something worthwhile, because I think that the accounting profession has done a much better job of telling those compelling stories and emphasizing the work-life balance. When you compare that to the image that kids have of the Wolf of Wall Street and some of the horror stories that you hear about investment banking hours, I think it's pretty compelling. But I don't think that this siloing of accounting and finance and even data analytics really does the students very much good, and I don't think it does the profession a lot of good. I think we would all be a bit better off if everyone knew more about, if accountants knew more about what finance people were doing, and vice versa. Are there any efforts to try to coordinate the activities of requiring 150 hours for people going into finance, or any other activities to try to broaden everyone's experience?
I think one of the tricky things with finance is that there's just such a broader array of occupations that a finance major does, right? So you do a finance major, you could become a loan officer, you could go into investment banking, you could be an investment advisor, you could go work for government. And so I think it's just not as natural a place to kind of impose a licensing requirement. I agree with you. There's a lot of value in people studying, both accounting and finance, and especially technology. I don't know if they keep track of double majors, for example, but if more schools would be willing to let students do a double major, if there's enough flexibility in the curriculum, it would sort of accomplish what you're saying.
Any other final questions for the panel? Well, I think we're right on time, spot on at 4:50. So Lindsay, Andrew, Rich, Becky, great thought-provoking panel, which I think reasons for optimism. So knock on wood here. Thank you very much. And off to Saba.
Actually, I think I'm going to introduce the next panel, but thank you, Steve, and the
sorry.
prior panel for that really interesting conversation. I know it's a topic we've been discussing on the IAG for some time now. So thank you for your expertise and insights. The last panel or last discussion that we will have before closing out our meeting today is a discussion of critical audit matters, which I think we started this process last year of nominating or asking for nominations of outstanding CAMs. And I'm pleased to introduce our colleague, Jeff Mahoney, who's the General Counsel for the Council of Institutional Investors. Jeff, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and good afternoon, everyone. So as Amy mentioned, last December, the members of the Investor Advisory Group issued a 20-plus page report entitled The First Annual Investor Advisory Group Decision Useful or Critical or Key Audit Matters for 2023, long title. That report was the culmination of an IAG project that was initiated 1 year ago at an April 2024 IAG meeting. So today, 1 year later, we are announcing that we are again seeking nominations from the general public, including audit committee chairs and members, auditors, financial analysts, investors, and academics for what they believe to be the most decision useful critical audit matters or key audit matters contained in the public company audit reports included in the 2024 Form 10-K or 20-F filings of SEC registrars. So those nominations, which like last year may be submitted anonymously, should also include for each matter nominated, we're asking the nominators provide a minimum 500-word explanation as to why they believe the nominated critical or key audit matter they're submitting provides decision useful information to investors. All the submissions should be sent via email to me, and my email address is Jeff, Jeff, at CII.org. The deadline for submissions is June 30th, 2025. All eligible nominations received will then be reviewed and evaluated by the members of the IAG. Members of the IAG will then vote for the 3 critical audit matters or key audit matters among those nominated that the members of the IAG believe provide the most decision useful information for investors. The 3 critical audit matters or key audit matters receiving the highest votes from the members of the IAG will be identified and discussed in detail in an IAG report that we expect to issue publicly before the end of 2025. So the goal of this annual initiative is to encourage independent auditors to voluntarily improve the quality of information communicated to investors in the audit reports of public companies. So anyone listening to me right now, please consider submitting at least 1 nomination by the June 30th deadline of the key or critical audit matter. If you have any questions at all regarding this project or the nominations, any questions at all, please feel free to contact me. Again, my email address is Jeff, Jeff, at CII.org, or feel free to give me a call. My number is 202-360-9919. That's 202-360-9919. So thank you for your time and attention. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Jeff. That's super exciting. I, for one, am really excited to see these nominated CAMs. I think it's really important work, and I'm really grateful for all that you've put into it and all the work that you do for the IAG. With that, I think we're closing out for our meeting today, and I'll turn it over to Saba in a moment. But first, I just wanted to thank all of our IAG committee members, the board members for their attention and participation and engagement with our group. I reiterate the importance of the collaboration and discussions that we have as an IAG with the PCAOB. And I echo my fellow IAG member discussions of earlier in the importance of the PCAOB and the work that they've done and that they continue to do. So with that, thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Saba. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And I just wanted to echo Amy's remarks. Thank you to members of the IAG, our board members, and our esteemed panelists for contributing to the discussion today. We hope you found it worth your while. We will be providing details about the next meeting that will be convened in Washington, D.C. in the fall. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.